Greetings, my fellow freedom lovers and sovereign thinkers. Thank you for tuning in to LL3 Podcast. My name is Craig, transmitting from the beautiful swampy mangroves of South Florida. And today's date is Sunday, June 7th, 2020. Yes, it's warm, little drizzle here and there, but that's what's about living in South Florida, right? Yes, tomorrow will be the 53rd anniversary on the horrific event that happened to the USS Liberty, where the Israeli military almost destroyed, actually heavily damaged or destroyed, without it sinking, a communication ship during the 6-Day War. And many of even the pilots have been coming out that they felt very disturbed. So just always remember those veterans, those brothers and sisters that suffered from this, and their families as well. The truth has to come out, and we don't care what the Zionist parasites have to say. Yes, and some people are like manifesting, laughing about certain Confederate statues are being ripped out or taken down. See, I denounce that. Because what you're seeing right now, what the order is doing is trying to destroy heritage, individualism, and culture. Same thing when they defaced the 54th Massachusetts Brigade Memorial. I denounce it all. Does it make me a racist? Does it make me a redneck? Bigot or anything like that? Because what's going down, what we're seeing by the hired fools, the hired guns, wants this place be decimated. It's even happening in Mexico as well, and everywhere else in the world. That's why you always got to beware of the faction game, folks. You better start learning the origins of these movements before jumping on some bandwagon. This is an example of what the coup is all about. So I'm going to be talking about these areas, a few, and of course how to do police reform. And this one will be entitled New World Order Coup via Belligerence and Propaganda. So the first article I'm going to be reading here will be coming from newsreviews.com. Came out today. This is by Kayla Nelson. ANTIFA, the network of violent criminal revolutionaries. You have a choice. There are two alternative futures for America. The launch at Cape Kennedy, you saw America leading the fourth industrial revolution. American capital, American workers, American made. And late at night, you saw what can happen, breaking down to anarchy and racial division. It's law and order predicated upon a robust economy, and this means capital brought back to America to stop financing our enemies. That's what Steve Bannon has to say. What we witnessed in Ferguson, in Baltimore, and in Baton Rouge was a collapse of social disorder. So many of the actions of the Occupy movement and Black Lives Matter transcend peaceful protest and violates the code of conduct we rely on. I call it anarchy. David A. Clark. The moment the idea is admitted into society that property is not as sacred as the laws of God, and that there is not a force of law and public justice to protect it, anarchy and tyranny commence. John Adams. The Defense of the Constitution of the Government of the United States, 1787. Professional criminal anarchists have hijacked legitimate protests against the death of George Floyd, which is a result of approved Minneapolis police training. We're now dealing with the virus of Antifa and anarchy, far more dangerous than COVID-19. The World Health Organization's overblown death rates were promoted by Pence, Fauci, and Burks, and cost Americans dearly. Organized professional anarchists are now destroying property and lives, extending the misery, and not enough is being done to stop them. Attorney General Barr says the DOJ now has evidence that Antifa and other extremist groups are instigating the rioting. You know, I'm not crazy about Barr, but I'm going to continue on here. Antifa is an international organization who is overly authoritarian. If you don't agree with them, you, your country, and your property should be smashed to bits. They are not a domestic organization. It is an international network of people. They have infiltrated governments, police departments, and anti-hate groups who fund their violent actions around the world. They have access to cash, to great legal resources, access to government officials, and to media. Antifa's Joseph Jose Alcoff. Smash Racism DC organizer Jose Alcoff, a.k.a. Jose Martin and Chepe, is a radical communist and Antifa leader operating in the U.S. He advocates for the violent overthrow of the government and for the murder of the rich, and claims to have international involvement in left-wing movements. The Tennessee Star wrote a brilliant expose on Martin in late 2018. He's a communist revolutionary out to destroy our capitalist society and is regularly hosted by a variety of Democratic politicians, including Dianne Feinstein, Tammy Baldwin, Don Bear, and has been pictured alongside Ohio Democratic Senator Sherrod Brown and California Democratic Representative Maxine Waters. Remember, Maxine Waters co-sponsored H.R. 1111, bringing the United Nations into America as so-called peacekeeping troops. What Antifa, like their like-minded groups, want is a dictatorial totalitarian communism. Smash Racism DC is an Antifa group that protested in front of Fox News' host Tucker Carlson's house and berated Senator Ted Cruz at a restaurant until he and his wife were forced to leave. It was only one of the Antifa leaders' radical left-wing projects. We have got to dispense with nonviolence, he said, as Chepe on Radio Dispatch in December 2016, during a discussion on how to approach those he perceives as fascist. He used his Jose Martin identity to make public appearances to promote socialism, once calling for a society without police. He may get his wish as Minneapolis Council members to aim to dismantle the police department and replace it with a transformative new model for public safety. But his communist Chepe aliases makes his Jose Martin identity seem moderate, using it to advocate to violence to achieve his goal of eliminating capitalism and the United States government. It could be argued that the ideological distance between Antifa and the now defunct National Socialist German Workers' Party, or Nazi Party, is so slight it can be measured in millimeters. Antifa are the new SA paramilitary force who carried out Kristallnacht, or the Night of Broken Glass. Of course, the video of James O'Keefe at Project Veritas just released a shocking video exposing Antifa assault training. This happened in New York City, by the way. Antifa's views of America and those who safeguard its free institutions as fundamentally illegitimate. It's goingdown.org advises activists to build a culture of non-cooperation with law enforcement. If you have any intention of working with the police, FBI, or other agencies, it continues, or if you publicly condemn anti-fascists who break the law, don't call yourself an anti-fascist. Managed decline. Steve Bannon's program on Newsmax is exemplary. You can find them archived at pandemic.warroom.org. There's a link for that. There's a lot of links here, folks. You can look for yourself. Much of the following information comes from one of Bannon's recent episodes. Antifa violence is not about George Floyd. Peaceful protests are legitimate. Freedom of assembly is guaranteed in our Constitution, one of our most basic rights. America is built on protest and peaceful protest during are during daylight hours. Evil hides in darkness. The lockdown protests were always during the day. ANTIFA operates at night. ANTIFA protests are thoroughly coordinated, and their people are highly trained. They are professional revolutionaries and anarchists, and their issue on the revolution is the revolution. Black Bloc partners with them, and they are dedicated, disciplined, and organized, and well-financed. This is not the amateur division. These groups are professional anarchists. They are part of worldwide managed decline. Managed decline looks like this. The Lincoln Memorial and the World War II Memorial have been defaced by these so-called peaceful protesters. They've burnt St. John's Church, and they try to burn the Hayes Adams Hotel, named after Secretary of State to Lincoln during the Northern War of Aggression. This is managed decline. This is managed decline, and it must be watched. ANTIFA is out to destroy this country, to destroy our freedom, our founders, and our way of life. It is all planned. And these are the very same ilk who were destroying and burning after Martin Luther King was murdered and the Democratic Convention held in Chicago in 1968. Yes, military force was used to quell the riots. And on May 30th, the anarchists even destroyed the Santa Monica Music Center. America's greatness or anarchy? Bannon says we have a choice. We have a new renaissance like Cape Canaveral that's Elon Musk and SpaceX along with their partners in NASA. That's the future we want and need. Or do you want Minneapolis on Friday or Saturday night? Last Friday night we lost when the President of the United States went to the bunker. That's the win for the anarchists. I agree with Bannon when he asked, where the hell were the Secret Service? Why the hell was this allowed to become this terrifying in America's capital? The head of the Secret Service of Homeland Security should be fired. People have to be held accountable. They let the entire situation with these anarchists get totally out of control. ANTIFA has been around for 20 years. They are in London, in Brazil, all over the world. And they are well established. They are very sophisticated, very organized, and a very well-funded operation. The Communist Organization Action Network supports the International Anti-Fascist Defense Fund. A connection between ANTIFA and George Soros and the Open Society Foundation is being made. Planned destruction. Anarchists bring along aluminum baseball bats and should be immediately arrested because they are there to do property and personal damage, and if they are from out of town, that's a federal offense. The New York Police Department's Deputy Commissioner for Intel and Counterterrorism, John Miller, said there is a high level of confidence within the NYPD that these unarmed groups had organized scouts, medics, and supply routes of rocks, bottles, and accelerants for groups to commit vandalism and violence. There are strong indicators they planned in advance for violence at using at times encrypted communication, and 1 out of 7 arrested was from out of state. Social media platforms are also used for organizing. There are suitcases down alleyways behind buildings which are filled with projectiles, tactical equipment, and supplies for the anarchists. There's plenty of videos on that, friends. And remember, many of them are police officers like they happen. Well, I saw one video in Boston was very similar. The alleyway behind St. John's Church was a staging area for the violence against the White House. How could D.C. police know that? The graffiti on the wall behind St. John's Church, St. John, says, "Kill cops, a tenet of Black Lives Matter." They also praised Fidel Castro, spitting in the face of the Cubans who lost their lives, their family, their home because of this murderous dictator. Dumpsters were set on fire and pushed into police lines. Reporters from both left and right organizations were seeing all of this, but not getting their heads around it. ANTIFA show up with equipment, with communications. They have strategies. When the 11 p.m. curfew struck, that's when they start lighting fires. NYPD has a highly efficient system against terrorism, but they're falling down on the job with ANTIFA violence and destruction. Law and order need to be held accountable for competence. Antifa hijacked the peaceful protest issue, and what they want is more police violence they can point to. But what often happens when police stand down is that they ended up getting hurt or kill themselves. Antifa infiltrates and motivates the peaceful protesters to join them in throwing bricks through windows, writing graffiti on buildings, burning down stores and looting. Their job is to recruit and embolden others. Here's a list. You can look at the list. There's a list of small businesses already destroyed in the Twin Cities of Minneapolis and St. Paul. Justin Diamond, a Minneapolis white woman who ran up to the police car of a black officer for help and shot and killed her. Mohammed Noor, an American Somali officer, shot and killed Justin, who had phoned the police for help. There were no riots in Minneapolis when a black officer murdered a white woman. Noor is spending 12 years in prison. And he had remorse, too. I read articles about that. He had remorse for his actions. So we'll just pursue here. Antifa terrorism. When Donald Trump said he was going to declare Antifa as a terrorist organization, the mainstream media immediately said, you can't do that because they're just domestic. That's a lie. They are worldwide and have been for 20 years. When President Trump said he wanted to call out the National Guard, he was right. And 28 states have done so to protect their citizens from these violent haters of God and freedom. Chicago, 1968. Downtown Chicago, during a Democratic convention in August of 1968, was under military lockdown. At the time, I worked downtown and lived at the Playboy Mansion on State Parkway. There was a 10 p.m. curfew. The city was on fire. Mayor Richard Daley has called out the National Guard. Fire departments had called in all off-duty firemen, watched the street from my girlfriend's third-floor apartment, and saw tanks and armored soldiers moving down State and Division Streets. Apartment buildings were boarded up and locked. Managers told residents to keep their shades down, but we watched. At the time, I was dating a fireman, Danny Morahari, and he was working 24/7 extinguishing fires throughout our huge city. Fires started by the same people who are once again rampaging our country. The destruction was massive. I can still see it clearly in my mind's eyes. It was a watershed event. Little Rock, Arkansas, 1957. Can you imagine armed troops blocking you from going to school? That's what happened in Little Rock, Arkansas in the fall of 1957. Governor Orville Faubus ordered the Arkansas National Guard to prevent black students from enrolling at an all-white Central High School. The 1954 Supreme Court decision, Brown versus Topeka, made segregation in public schools illegal. Governor Faubus defied this decision. He also defied a 1955 ruling, Brown 2. 1955 decision ordered that public schools be desegregated with all deliberate speed. President Eisenhower wanted to uphold the law, but he didn't want bloodshed. He met with Governor Faubus, who agreed to allow black Americans into the high school. But then he withdrew his promise. Eisenhower had kept the National Guard at the school to enforce the order of integration. When 9 black children slipped into the school and enrolled, a full-scale riot erupted. The mayor of Little Rock appealed to the president for help. Crowds formed outside the high school. Eisenhower knew he had to act boldly. He placed the Arkansas National Guard under federal control and sent 1,000 U.S. Army paratroopers from the 101st Airborne Division to assist them in restoring order in Little Rock. The daring tactic worked, and the black American students were enrolled without further violent disturbances. The law had been upheld, but Eisenhower was criticized both by those who felt he had not done enough to ensure civil rights for African Americans and those who believed he had gone too far in asserting federal power over the states. Interesting. Do we see history repeat itself, folks? You're talking to a guy who's not even a Trump lover, but history's repeating itself. The same rhetoric over and over again. Military hierarchy. Our president is in much the same predicament today as the previous president and has been escalated by none other than former Secretary of Defense General James Mattis, former Chief of Staff General Kelly, and former Chiefs Chairman Mike Mullen, and former Joint Chiefs of Staff Joseph Dunsford. Even his Secretary of Defense, Mark Esper, has been disparaged the president's attempt to stop the carnage in American cities by using the military, by which the way he has used 12 times before the previous president. President Trump has extolled our military and helped them in so many ways, and yet these top leaders abuse him for wanting to protect Americans from anarchist forces. These military men should be willing to do anything to quell this violence, yet they damn our president. Police in democratic-held cities are told to stand down, let the violence and destruction happen, despite the fact that 307 officers have been injured, 2 of them have been killed, and former police captain was gunned down and killed in St. Louis when he tried to stop looters. Could we say exceptionalism, folks? Damn right. Conclusion. Washington, D.C. Mayor Muriel Bowser had Black Lives Matter printed in huge yellow letters down 16th Street leading to the White House. Other Americans apparently don't matter to Bowser. And only some Black Lives Matter because many are murdered in their mother's womb. Bowser also named the plaza Black Lives Matter, honoring the terrorist group. The BLM movement needs to be exposed of what it is: a racist, violent hate group that promotes the execution of police officers. This is why they've joined with Antifa. Both are anarchists. Bowser also wants all National Guard troops out of Washington, leaving the White House unprotected. She is kowtowing to anarchists. Can we say the word treason, my friends? Journalists are demanding that police protect them at George Floyd's protest, but apparently the rest of us don't count. In a recent article by Congressman Andy Biggs, he wrote, "The thin blue line tries to protect every person's rights. They need to show force. They need to make arrests. They need the support of the National Guard. They need the support of political leaders." Senator Tom Cotton said, "If politicians will not do their most basic job to protect your citizens, let's see how these anarchists respond when the 101st Airborne is on the other side of the street." Well, it's funny about that. I'm not really too crazy about Cotton himself. He's one big imperialist when it comes to the military-industrial complex. Our president is right. Force is the only thing anarchists understand. Forget about gold and silver. Buy lead. And an interesting article there from her. And what's the thing that's intriguing about it, because you got to look at this that's why self-defense is a right thing to do. People should need to organize against tyranny. And right here, what is interesting here is Franklin's philosophy of defense. Clear back in 1747, Ben Franklin vividly comprehended the task ahead. Said he, "Where the Union is formed, we are once united, thoroughly armed and disciplined, where everything in our power done for our security as far as human means and force that could provide, we might then, with more propriety, humbly ask the assistance of heaven and the blessings on our lawful endeavors." This is from the writings of Benjamin Franklin. And we can do right here one more. "Protection is a truly due from the government to the people, and obedience from the people is due to the government." That's what Ben Franklin has to say, and many other founding fathers as well. That's why you always got to look at the bigger picture, folks. This is an example why you have to defy a New World Order coup. And we're going to hit this next one here about the Bogyman theory. You hear the whole terminology of white power, white supremacists, All this arrogant rhetoric. Arrogant rhetoric indeed. So, and this is one here. Came from Craig Roberts, Paul Craig Roberts, for the Institute for Political Economy. How did the KKK boogeyman grow so large? More evidence, facts that don't matter in America. We need to ask ourselves, how do we become so brainwashed? Why we're so gullible to trust liberal media? Here's a link from UNZ.com about the Ku Klux Klan's mass racial killings. You should look it up for yourself. Just a couple of weeks ago, it was discovered that an attractive white teenage girl has been kidnapped by a group of black men in Florida, held captive and gang raped for days, then finally killed and discarded, with her body fed to alligators. I found no mention of this grotesque tale in any of the major national newspapers, even as the New York Times reported that Hollywood was in planning stages of 3 different major movies about the famous Emmett Till murder case from 60 years ago. By hiding certain events and heavily emphasize others, our media apparatus can create any desired picture of the world. Until recently, almost none of us would have been wiser. In fact, evidence suggests that the overwhelming majority of all racial motivated violent attacks in America each year are committed by blacks, usually against whites, though sometimes against Asians or Hispanics. But these attacks are almost ignored by the media, while the newscasters and politicians seem so desperate to shine the spotlight on any that occurred in the opposite direction, even if they are almost nowhere to be found. Indeed, a few years ago, I pointed out that for decades, this statistical correlation across all urban cities between the prevalence of blacks and the prevalence of serious crime have been among the highest found anywhere in the social sciences, strongly suggesting that marginal urban crime is essentially a black phenomenon. But individuals who form their view of the world primarily from our mainstream media would probably remain unaware of these important facts before the internet. Only gossip and rumor might have challenged a media-endorsed falsehoods. Once Americans conclude that our supposedly objective media functions merely as corrupt propaganda machine, why should statements of prominent establishment pundits or reporters count for anything more than the sarcastic tweets of some angry anonymous blogger? Those have allowed the currency of journalistic integrity to become totally debased have only themselves to blame when they discovered it is no longer accepted by the general public. That's right. Propaganda, folks. Double standards. Anything interracial, people get wound up. Doesn't matter. Like look what happened years ago with that one woman. They said she got gang raped by a bunch of black men in Central Park. They all went in a manifestation. But if it's black on black or white on white, no one would care. Etc. But anything interracial, they want to pulverize it. Drill it in our heads. That's what we're seeing what's going on with George Floyd. And I know he has a checkered past. He has a lot of rough edges. He was considered a violent criminal. Violent felon. But that's the big thing. So they don't want to have you talk about that, right? Because not they may call you a racist or white privilege. Screw all that. Damn thing. The truth does not make you a bigot or a racist. This is why you always gotta look at the bigger picture. Don't give a damn what you are. It's not ethnic. It's not ethnicity. It's ethnicity. Judged by their actions. Nothing more, nothing less. Alright, here's one thing you can say here about, from Bob Livingston. Actually, from the alt market. Brandon Smith wrote a nice little article here. The riots will be exploited and George Floyd will be quickly forgotten. Mass civil unrest is a cumbersome weapon for societal change. Like a giant caveman club made of heavy oak, you can barely swing it. And you might destroy an enemy with it, but you might also unwillingly destroy innocent people at the same time. Once the club is in motion, adjusting is direct or momentum becomes impossible. Prefer a scalpel approach. Find the cancer and cut it out directly rather than bashing at the whole body just to get at the cancer. Another problem with protests and riots is that they often have no discernible goals, or they lose track of their goals almost immediately. When the initial protest started, they targeted the police precinct in Minneapolis, which was home to the officers that killed George Floyd. In my view, that was perfectly acceptable. At this stage, the majority of Americans were on their side. Many conservative and law enforcement officers even came out in support of these measures and admonished their actions that violated common police procedures that led to unnecessary death. Now the situation has turned into something far beyond the killing of George Floyd. It has become a vehicle of agendas, and not surprisingly, the establishment benefits most. The very establishment of the protesters think they're fighting against. Riots have been co-opted, where whites and blacks, conservatives and liberals alike, were mostly in agreement. Now there are attempts at division. Why is the death of Floyd presented as a race issue in the first place? Why is it not being presented as a psychopath issue? There are psychopaths in every race in equal numbers, and this should be the people's focus. In other words, psychopaths must be removed from society, whether they be police, politicians, business leaders, or even caretakers. Here is about some examples. In Mesa, Arizona in 2017, a white man named Daniel Shaver was murdered by Officer Philip Brailsford. After an anonymous tip told police he had a rifle in his hotel room. Though it is not illegal to own a rifle in Arizona, it is certainly not illegal to bring one into a hotel. A team of officers was sent with AR-15s to approach and arrest Shaver. Brailsford ordered a frightening Shaver to crawl across the floor instead of asking him to lay on the ground with his hands and feet spread as is normal police procedure. The man, sobbing in terror, reached to pull up his shorts, which were falling off, and was riddled with bullets by Brailsford. Watching the video, it is clear that Brailsford created a situation in which Shaver could easily make a mistake and thereby create an excuse for an officer to kill him in cold blood. As it turned out, the rifle Shaver had in his room was a BB gun. A jury later acquitted Brailsford for any wrongdoing. On the same day, an officer was sentenced to 20 years in prison for the murder of an unarmed motorist. The difference? The motorist in South Carolina was black. It's interesting, but what you gotta look at, folks, is just how these people think. And you know what? I gotta look at states differently too. So we'll just continue on here. The point is, psychopathic cops kill people regardless of their skin color. White people are at risk as much as black people, but at least when a black person is wrongly killed, the public might take serious notice. There were no nationwide protests or riots on Daniel Shaver. The establishment works in favor of psychopaths, not white people. In fact, Phil Brailsford was fired and then rehired for a short time by the Mesa police so he could still apply for his pension. What about the psychopaths that aren't white cops? Oh, there are plenty of them. How about Michael Noor, a black Minneapolis police officer that killed an unarmed white woman? Justin Rezick in 2017, while responding to a 911 call, leftist activists, including those of the NAACP at the time, claimed that Noor was being unfairly targeted because he was black. You hear that, folks? Because he was black. But now the NAACP is going to praise George Floyd. Could we say, on the police, could we say double standards? Damn right. And remember, man, the NAACP now are infiltrated with globalist hacks. There were no protests for riots for Justin Rezick. Though Though luckily, Michael Moore did go to jail for his crime, which was manslaughter. And if we're going to continue following the threat of violence of psychopathy versus race, I can't leave out the black nurse in Detroit that filmed herself torturing elderly patients by beating them repeatedly in their beds, completely unable to defend themselves. The man has been arrested, but again, no riots did over this horror show. There are evil people of every race and ethnicity. It is in this world that do terrible things. However, the worst people are those that exploit the tensions that these evil people create in order to turn crisis into opportunity. The reason there are riots happening globally now in the wake of George Floyd is because people are angry, but also people are malleable and easy to manipulate when they are angry. Mind control 101. The country has just partially reopened from pandemic lockdowns, and more lockdowns likely before the year is out. Over 40 million people lost their jobs during the economic shutdown, and the government checks are not going to last much longer. Only 13% to 18% of small businesses that requested aid actually received money from small business bailout, and most of those that did not get money are facing closure. Government restrictions have been accelerating, and people are already on edge. Riots were inevitable. But with the death of George Floyd, riots can be manipulated. Propaganda 101 by Edward Bernays. I encourage everyone reading it, okay? Now the range of the masses can be directed on false issues of race and shallow left-right politics instead of being discredited at corrupt government and the elites that created the economic mess we now see before us. The protests over George Floyd probably started out with pure intentions, and now they have been poisoned by outsiders seeking to create useful chaos. Provocateurs have infiltrated the protests and are attempting to trigger indiscriminate violence. Pre-staged weapons such as piles of bricks, bottles, and other items have been appearing magically in protest zones. Property is being destroyed by people not connected to the main protest groups. Odd occurrences are popping up everywhere. Here is where it is all headed. As I predicted, just after the elections of Donald Trump, it appears the goal of the establishment is to produce extreme division among the American public and then exploit the hard left as a weapon to frighten conservatives into supporting martial law. An article from November 2016, I stated, with Trump and conservatives taking near total power after the left has assumed, they would never lose again. Their reaction has been transformed. They are stepping away from the normal activities and the mindset of cultural Marxism and evolving into full-blown communists. Instead of admitting that their ideology is a failure in every respect, they are doubling down. When this evolution is complete, the left will resort to direct violent action on a larger scale, and they will do so with a clear conscience because in their minds they are fighting racism. Ironically, it will be this behavior by crazy leftists that may actually push conservatives toward a fascist model. Conservatives might decide to fight crazy with more crazy. It is just a coincidence that conservatives were the most opposed to medical martial law only a week ago in the face of the pandemic, and now they are considering merits of martial law in the face of the leftist-influenced riots. And who actually benefits from this? The elitist establishment that's been calling for martial law measures from the very beginning. If they can trick conservatives into suddenly supporting the lockdowns, curfews, and the National Guard military presence to stop the protests, then they will defeat us without firing a shot. We will have defeated ourselves. To all you Trump worshippers, conservatives, better be paying attention. The bottom line, more government is power, never the solution to any problem. Totalitarianism is never the answer. The solution in this case is to prosecute the police involved in the murder of George Floyd to the full extent of the law, point out that it is a problem of abuse of power and psychopathy, not a problem of race and to stop outside interest for busting in provocateurs to trigger riots. If this current trend continues, it would not surprise me at all if George Floyd becomes a forgotten footnote in the riots that were started in his name. And certain elites get their way. If certain elites get in their way, people will continue to riot without even knowing why, and those riots will never be aimed at the people who actually deserve it. To all you provocateurs, rioters out there, you're never considered protesters in my books, but criminals. And the people who are honorable law enforcers, and even folks in the militia, organized or not, if they ever do that, try to violate your space, raid your homes, damage your property, you are entitled to use force when it's necessary. Natural rights prevail. And anyone that gets involved are treasonous parasites, no exceptions. That's why you always got to look at these areas, folks. It's a lot deeper than what it is. And this is why I tell everybody, arm up. No ends if they're butts. But information as well. But one thing about it I like, folks from all walks of life are calling these bastards out, the deep state and all that. Even the young pharaoh, I admire. Someone sent that to me about the young pharaoh, and I admire that dearly. He's a true seeker, even though he can be vulgarly bombastic at times, but he's sending the message. Even David Icke from England, he's being banned. Was being banned in a lot of areas. Why? Because he's speaking the truth. And they're all going for Alex Jones. Look, they already took out Bill Cooper, the deep state. Okay, this has all been done by design. And a lot of folks from all walks of life are suffering from it. So it's not a white privilege thing. You got a bottle psychopath in all walks of life. So, and it was interesting here. George Washington made a statement on this. One moment here. George Washington made a clear statement on this. He said this: the alternate domination of one faction over another is itself a frightful deposition. George Washington made that statement. That's one of the areas where you have to always look at the fine print. Tio bono. Who benefits? That's what the order is. They don't give a damn about any of us. Even the higher guns are being used. I'm going to do one more here. And this came out a couple of days ago. Mises.org is a very fantastic site. And it says here, 3 ways law enforcement must be reformed now. That's what Ray McMacken has to say. I don't know what the acts of police abuse and brutality are motivated by racism and which are not. But let's say, for the sake of the argument, that we could end all racial bias immediately through some magic spell or button we could press. We would end this police abuse, or even most of it. Experience tells us no. The data is clear that police abuse is not limited to any particular group. Indeed, a majority of those by police are white. For an example, when a police officer, I always talk about this here, yes, about Beresford, and of course Duncan Lepp in his sleep. Remember that no-knock raid that happened in Baltimore? Yeah, he was white. Police pinned Tony Pitma on the ground until he died. I was in Dallas after Pitma died and choked about. Yeah, I'm going to go, okay, yeah, I want to go here. Of course, it said about Timpa. Sorry about that, folks. I read some of the stuff on a show about this a while back, but I'm going to, You know what? What the hell? I'll just read it. I'll just read everything. What the hell? For example, when police officer Philip Bradford gunned down Daniel Schaefer, it is unlikely that he was motivated by some sort of ethnic or racial bias. The same was probably true when police shot Duncan Lemp in his sleep during the no-knock raid, or when police pinned Tony Timpa to the ground until he died. It happened in Dallas. After Timpa died, police joked about it and apparently found the situation quite hilarious. It is not limited to not just the local police personnel. When federal agents massacred more than 80 people, mostly white men, women, and children at Waco, law enforcement officers probably weren't motivated by the race of their victims either. Police also appear to have an aversion to being callously indifferent toward victims of all racial and ethnic backgrounds. When police elected to cower outside Stoneman Douglas rather than to face the gunmen slaughtering children inside, it is unlikely that they paid too much attention to the racial makeup of the student body, is a majority of which was white. Unfortunately, anecdotes like these could be recalled for hours and hours, but non-whites are more often targeted proportionately, some might say. This may be so, and indeed some may decide that turning police into equal opportunity abusers is a type of progress in itself, but it hardly addresses the systematic foundations of police abuse. And the underlying problems are substantial. They are systemic, and built into law enforcement community in the United States for several reasons. First, the police are protected from accountability both by laws granting them illegal immunity and by police labor unions that should abuse it. Secondly, the proliferation of laws designed to target nonviolent people for petty offenses, most commonly drug offenses, provides police with nearly endless opportunities to stop and harass people who have committed no real crime. Murray Rothbard has illustrated how the idea in the situation would be a type of police privatization. But for those who are not ready for such radical reform, much can be done in the meantime through more mild and yet very necessary reforms. 1. End legal immunity for police. At the core of the issue is a lack of accountability and legal liability on the part of the government employees who enforce the laws. Thanks to the activist pro-government judges and legislation designed to shield police, it is extremely difficult to hold abusive law enforcement agents accountable. Chris Carlton explained, the doctrine for qualified immunity essentials say that a police officer to be held accountable, there must be a statute specifying all the particularities his or her unique situation. Anything even remote ambiguous falls under the broad category of discretion. In theory, legal immunity is qualified, but in practice is effectively absolute. Like, special relationships and all that, torts. This way of thinking, however, is only a few decades old. It was solidified by American law by activist Supreme Court judges in 1967. Their ruling essentially create new law which erected new barriers against holding police accountable for abusive behavior. As ABC reported this week, where the Civil Rights Act of 1871 gives Americans the humongous, unambiguous ability to sue public officials over civil rights violations, the Supreme Court substantially limited liability to those rights had become clearly established by law. Critics say the standard is near possible to meet. In order for a plaintiff to defeat qualified immunity, they have to find a prior case that was held unconstitutional, an incident with virtually identical facts to the one of the plaintiff is bringing, said UCLA law professor Joanna Schwartz. And over the last 15 years, the court has made it more and more difficult for plaintiffs to go to trial. Last month, a Reuters report noted that the doctrine has become nearly fail-safe tool to let police brutality go unpunished and deny victims their constitutional rights. Consequently, Carlton concludes there are several layers of negative incentives built into the criminal justice system, but qualified immunity arguably serves as most the dangerous and perverse incentive structures governing the police. Through legal evolution, The protection offered has expanded to an absurd degree where an officer can record himself murdering a man as part of a sadistic game only to be rewarded with an early retirement. Police officers enjoy an almost untrammeled liberty for brutality, theft, and murder. Those who do not abuse their authority restrain themselves not because of institutional structures, but despite them. Qualified immunity is clearest example that the rule of law is dead, or perhaps never existed. Government officials live by one set of rules, and the rest of us live by another. And that is absolutely true, folks. And this is why it's an example of political corruption. To abolish police unions. Public sector unions in general have always been objectionable. Since these unions empower workers in monopoly industries funded through forced income transfer from taxpayers to the government workers, whether we're talking about teachers, trash collectors, or police officers, Tom DeLorenzo explained. The main reason why so many state and local governments are bankrupt or on the verge of bankruptcy is the combination of government-run monopolies and government employee unions. Government employee unions have vastly more power than do private sector unions because the entities they work for typically monopolies. When employees of a grocery store, for example, go on strike and shut down the store, consumers can simply shop elsewhere, and the grocery store management is perfectly free to hire replacement for workers. In contrast, a city teacher or garbage truck driver's union goes on strike, there is no school, no garbage, no collection as long as the strike goes on. In addition, teacher tenure typically after 2 or 3 years in government schools and civil service regulations make it extremely costly, if not virtually impossible, to hire replacement workers. It's interesting because some states, they have a law that public employees are not allowed to strike. Like Florida, for an example, under Article 1, Section 6 of the Florida Constitution. So I'm going to continue on here. Thus, when government bureaucrats go on strike, they have the ability to completely shut down the entire industry they work indefinitely. Taxpayers will complain bitterly about the absence of schools and garbage collection, forcing the mayor, governor, or city council to quickly cave in to the union's demands to avoid risking the loss of their own jobs due to voter dissatisfaction. Police unions, because the nature of police work, are even more dangerous. These unions are central to shielding police officers to legal accountability and ensuring that known violent offenders in the police force continue to collect salaries and benefits. Police unions also repeatedly press for more aggressive tactics on the part of the police as an effort to increase officer safety at the expense of public safety. Can we say extortion? Damn right. As Reuters noted yesterday, efforts to overhaul the way policing is done in Minneapolis repeatedly fizzled in the face of powerful 800-member union that champion military-style police tactics. The union labor contracts from the city is a formidable rollback to citizens seek disciplinary action. The research has found, nor this is unusual. The police union contract is not unusual. Dozens of other contracts across the United States contain provisions that stymie efforts to hold cops accountable for violence and other alleged abuses. The news agency examined contracts in 82 cities. For that article found that 46 required departments to erase disciplinary records, some just after 6 months. The absence of paper trail makes firing officers with a history of abuse difficult, and the lawyers and police chiefs say. As Tate vaguely illustrated earlier this week at Mises.org, Mises.org, police union contracts are driving force behind the requirement that police fired for misconduct be able to appeal easily. Consequently, many police officers who have been fired for well-established records of misconduct and brutality are rehired. As with teachers, unions, and unions in general, police unions exist to protect their members that are often at odds with the public interest and with the interests of taxpayers. In this context, standing up for workers means ensuring less accountability, higher pay, and less work, i.e., fewer services available to the public. 3. End the drug war. One of the most important factors in limiting police abuse is reducing the number of violations that the police can use to justify the harassment of peaceful citizens. Without the drug war, of course, police would have far fewer ways of justifying traffic stops and searches, surveillance of private citizens, and raids of their homes. As I noted in 2016, too many laws why police encounters escalate. Dealing with violent crime constitutes a small minority of what police deal with on a daily basis. For an example, in 2014, out of 11,205,833 arrests made nationwide in the U.S., 498,666 arrests were for violent crimes, and 1,553,980 arrests were for property crime. That means 82% of arrests made for something other than violent crime or property crime. Moreover, many of these nonviolent offenses, such as drug use, liquor violations, carrying an illegal knife, or other infractions that should be regarded as small-time offenses, can result in serious jail time or prison time, as well as steep fines and lost earnings. For instance, the highly publicized death of Eric Garner at the hands of police was conflict precipitated by sales of untaxed cigarettes by Garner. The police who killed Freddie Gray in custody, in Baltimore, later claimed the arrest was necessary because Gray possessed a knife that violated city ordinances. He carried a knife. Oh my goodness. Let's all run to the effing hills. Right? Absolutely. This is how ridiculous some of these ordeals are, folks. Okay? It's just an example. It happens to folks of all walks of life. Okay? It doesn't matter what your skin color is and all that. This is just an example. And there are countless cases of non-criminals who have been stopped, searched, and arrested and imprisoned for petty drug offenses such as possession. Indeed, police departments spend an immense amount of time and resources on these nonviolent offenses at the expense of violent crime investigations. Most of these offenses are drug offenses. The Baltimore Police Department, for example, in a jurisdiction where homicides are 10 times high as a national average, devotes less than 3% of its officers to homicide investigations. In the United States, less than half of violent crimes are ever investigated, to the point where we might call them closed cases. Please focus on nonviolent and petty offenders, in part because it's easier to do so. But there are other benefits as well. Harassing drug offenders can bring financial windfalls thanks to asset forfeiture that allow law enforcement agencies to confiscate private property even on the filmiest of pretexts. These laws have been greatly strengthened by the drug war. Benefits of reform. The benefits of reform, just these three measures could go a long way in changing incentives for police abuse while raising the likelihood of dismissal or other sanctions for abusive behavior. Whatever it is that motivates law enforcement officers who commit abusive acts is a safe bet that we would see less abuse if officers were not as well shielded from legal action, which might hold them accountable. Moreover, if police were no longer empowered to accost and confront private citizens over petty drugs and weapon offenses, the opportunity for abuse would likely be substantially diminished. That's right, folks. Get them where it hurts. And this is when people ask me about the whole thing about defunding the police, you know how you do it? End all those asset forfeitures, civil asset forfeitures, drug wars. Time for them to be peace officers once again rather than deputies of Nottingham. That's the damn truth. And that's what these individuals do. You get them where it hurts. If they complain, just give them a little, play a little fiddle, and go. Yes, the composition for you guys. Give me sympathy, Opus wine. People are tired of it. It's happening everywhere, even in Fort Lauderdale, for goodness sakes. And technology is countering that too. So whatever you do, folks, be vigilant. Know your rights. Remember, they're naturally born. And don't let fear conquer you. Let action conquer its fear. And you know what? In the long view, if everyone does it, we can call the shots. Remember, when the people fear the government is tyranny, when the government fears people is liberty. And that is it. I know it's almost an hour long here, almost an hour. I thank everyone for listening. Plus, feel free to download and share us throughout your social media networks. If you have any questions, comments, or me send something interesting you want to check out, whatever you do, please send your correspondence with decorum. Furthermore, I'll leave all the footnotes I narrated on my Spreaker page. If you don't do a donation, you can hit me at paypal.me/LokiLuck3, which is the number 3 is all together. Once again, thank you for your time. But always remember that demoniac resistance is healthy for the soul and can liberate humanity. Until next time, take care of yourselves. Keep on spreading the love, and may your guardian spirits be with you.